Welcome back to the channel, where history isn't just old, it's deeply questionable. Today we're diving into the insane truth about the medieval castle. You might think castles were majestic stone palaces filled with knights, honor, and fancy dinners. But reality? More like a fortified nightmare with drafty rooms, questionable hygiene, and design choices that scream, did anyone think this through? Stay till the end, because the final truth will make you glad you live in the age of indoor plumbing. Castles weren't romantic. They were cold, damp stone prisons. Castles look stunning from the outside, until you actually step inside and realize you've basically entered a medieval refrigerator. Sure, the exterior screams royalty and glory, but the inside whispers, welcome to a stone box of misery. Most medieval castles were freezing, not a little chilly, but if you stop moving, you will die cold. People weren't cuddling by fireplaces. They were shivering under blankets, wondering why they didn't choose a nice wooden house in a village instead. Walls were so thick they could stop an army, and also any attempt at warming the place by even 1 degree. You could light a massive fireplace, and the castle would respond with the enthusiasm of a rock. Heat wasn't circulating, it was disappearing into the void. People weren't living like kings, they were basically camping indoors for their entire lives. Except instead of tents and marshmallows, they had stone walls, damp floors, and a strong chance of developing medieval pneumonia. And they smelled really, really bad. Hollywood lied. Castles didn't smell like roasted boar, fresh bread, and candle wax drifting romantically through the halls. They smelled like life before deodorant, which is already terrifying, multiplied by 300 people in one stone building with no airflow. The real castle scent was a legendary mix of smoke, sweat, wet wool, old food, and the medieval version of please don't ask. If you sniffed too deeply, you'd unlock a smell that could bring down a charging horse. There were no chimneys in early castles, meaning smoke from the Great Hall fireplace didn't escape. It just hung around like a toxic roommate that refused to move out. Every room had the warm embrace of low-key smoke inhalation. Add in poor ventilation, damp walls, animal smells, and hundreds of people living inside, and you got the aroma equivalent of a gym bag stuffed inside another gym bag, lightly seasoned with sewage. Castle toilets were a horror movie. The garderobe, or medieval toilet, was essentially a hole in the wall, because medieval architects apparently said, plumbing? Never heard of her. Your royal bathroom experience consisted of sitting on a stone seat and letting gravity handle the rest, right down the castle wall. That means you weren't just doing your business. You were doing it directly onto your enemies, the moat, or some poor villager who was just trying to deliver bread. Imagine walking under a castle and suddenly receiving a medieval surprise from above. And the drafts? Oh yes. The garderobe was famous for the icy wind that blew upward, giving you the original natural bidet experience. It wasn't refreshing. It was the kind of surprise that makes you question every life decision. Moats weren't just water. Sometimes they were biohazards. Some moats had water, some didn't, and some were basically medieval landfills filled with whatever the castle didn't want anymore. Forget the shining blue moat from fairy tales. These were closer to a liquid crime scene. Some moats weren't filled with water at all, just pits of mud, spikes, or whatever unpleasant surprise the defenders could dream up. It was less picturesque castle feature and more, welcome to the world's worst obstacle course. And then there were the sewage moats. Yes, moats full of actual castle waste. Imagine being an attacking soldier, psyching yourself up for battle, only to leap courageously into what can only be described as a medieval smoothie of poop, trash, and unidentifiable floating horrors. Congratulations, you died a hero, a very brave hero, a very, very smelly hero who will absolutely not be given an open casket funeral. Castle kitchens were chaos incarnate. Feasting halls might look glamorous in movies. Shining goblets, golden plates, perfectly roasted boar. But the kitchens behind those scenes were pure, unfiltered chaos. Think less royal culinary mastery and more, please don't catch fire while stirring that pot. The cooks were overworked, stressed, and one bad day away from starting an accidental revolution. They handled boiling cauldrons, mountains of raw meat, knives the size of small swords, and the constant risk of being yelled at by someone who thought spices were witchcraft. Everything was cooked over open flames. The entire kitchen was basically a bonfire that occasionally produced food. One wrong move, and congratulations. You've not only burned the stew, you've set half the staff on fire. And yes, there was always the looming possibility of burning down the entire castle. Imagine explaining to the king, "Sorry, Your Majesty, dinner went slightly overcooked, and so did your home." Most rooms weren't bedrooms. They were multi-purpose survival spaces. Forget having a bedroom, an office, a gaming room, and a walk-in closet. Medieval castles didn't believe in specialized spaces. Every room was every room. Sleeping room? Yes. Storage room? Also yes. Dining space? Sure. Impromptu weapon workshop? Absolutely. If you lived in a castle, your bedroom was basically the medieval version of a studio apartment, but one designed by someone who thought walls were optional and privacy was a luxury for the weak. You might be trying to sleep while someone next to you is polishing armor and another person is loudly complaining about rats. Hosting guests? Oh, they slept in the same room too. No VIP suites, no private chambers, just everyone existing together like a medieval sleepover nobody wanted to attend. Hope you like the sound of snoring, clanking metal, and that one guy who talks in his sleep like he's fighting dragons. Castle life wasn't about comfort. It was about survival, making do with limited space, and pretending that sharing a room with 12 other people was totally normal. It wasn't Pinterest-worthy, unless Pinterest has a medieval overcrowded chaos category. Castle defenses were brilliant and petty. Castles weren't just strong, they were built to annoy invaders. Arrow slits, moats, drawbridges, everything designed to make attackers regret showing up. Medieval engineers basically said, "Let's turn this place into the ultimate frustration simulator." But nothing beat machicolations. Those holes above the gate where defenders dropped rocks, boiling oil, or anything painful and gravity-friendly. It was the medieval home security system. No alarms, just instant suffering. Invaders knew this would happen and still ran toward the gate anyway. Defenders casually tossed boulders like they were feeding ducks. If castles had reviews, sieges would average 1 star. Got crushed by a rock. Hospitality was disappointing. And just to stay extra petty, some castles even added fake weak spots. Tiny side doors that looked like an easy shortcut. Attackers rushed in, only to end up trapped in a narrow hallway, built specifically for getting bonked from above. Medieval trolling at its finest. Castle life was constant noise and zero privacy. You think roommates are loud? Try living in a stone echo chamber with soldiers marching, blacksmiths hammering, animals screaming, kids sprinting around, and nobles yelling orders like they're stuck on maximum volume. Thick stone walls didn't block noise. They amplified it. Basically a medieval megaphone you couldn't escape. Privacy? Forget it. Castle rooms didn't have doors, just curtains that acted more like suggestion barriers. Servants walked in constantly, guards barged through hallways, and anyone could overhear your conversations because sound traveled like gossip on steroids. And because everyone shared space, kitchens, halls, sleeping areas, your business instantly became community information. Whisper a secret? Congratulations, the entire castle knows before lunchtime. Medieval privacy settings, permanently stuck on public. Medieval castle parties were absolute mayhem. When nobles threw feasts, they launched feasts. Music pounding, dancers everywhere, drinking games that absolutely ended careers, and enough food to give a warhorse indigestion. These weren't dinners. They were organized chaos with tablecloths. Hygiene? Absolutely non-existent. Bones on the floor, grease on sleeves, spilled wine soaking everything, and guests casually wiping their hands on the nearest dog. Medieval feasts were basically frat parties, but with plate armor. The entertainment always escalated. One moment, elegant music. Next moment, drunken wrestling, dice gambling, shouting competitions, and someone challenging a knight to arm wrestle after 3 pints too many. It was part party, part sporting event, part disaster. And the mess afterward, legendary. Tables overturned, floors coated in bones and spilled gravy, torches half burned out, and at least one night asleep in a punch bowl. The cleanup crew deserved hazard pay, therapy, and maybe a new kingdom to live in. Castles took forever to build and were outdated by the time they finished. Some castles took decades, even centuries, to finish. Imagine starting a castle, then your kids continue it, and your grandkids finally go, okay, last brick. At that point, it's not a fortress anymore. It's a family inheritance problem. But by the time the last stone was placed, warfare had completely evolved. Gunpowder showed up, cannons appeared, and suddenly your brand new fortress was basically a large decorative target. Medieval architects unintentionally built giant stone museums, structures that were outdated the moment they opened. It's the historical equivalent of spending 100 years building the world's best VHS player. And to make things worse, repairs took almost as long. You'd patch one wall only for a new weapon to be invented that broke it again. Building a castle became a never-ending tech update, except the updates were giant explosions. The biggest truth: castles were symbols, not comfort. At the end of the day, castles weren't built for comfort. They were giant stone flexes, medieval billboards shouting, "Look how powerful I am." Meanwhile, the inside was freezing, dark, smelly, and about as cozy as a refrigerator full of knights. Castles were meant to intimidate enemies and impress visitors, not keep you warm or comfortable. Drafty halls, tiny windows, smoky fireplaces, and furniture so stiff it probably counted as a form of punishment. So yes, castles were architectural masterpieces, but they were also giant stone bragging rights. Incredible from the outside, miserable from the inside. Think of them as the medieval version of buying an expensive sports car that has no heating and constantly smells weird. And honestly, the symbol over comfort mindset extended everywhere. Kitchens were smoky torture chambers, bathrooms were basically holes in the wall, and beds were slabs that doubled as medieval chiropractic therapy. Power greater than comfort, always. So that's the insane truth about medieval castles. Majestic on the outside, miserable on the inside. Stone fortresses that scream power but whispered, "Good luck with your back pain and smelly hallways." Beautiful symbols of power, engineering, and questionable life choices. From defenses designed to crush invaders or confuse them, to feasts that doubled as chaos competitions, castles were impressive and exhausting. If you enjoyed this historical deep dive into medieval discomfort, hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Would you live in a medieval castle for 24 hours? Be honest, you wouldn't last 10 minutes near the garderobe. Thanks for watching. See you in the next weird slice of history.